So, you think you know Nelson Mandela. The world remembers this saintly figure, right? But his enemies, they called him a terrorist. And now, a whole new generation of his own people are calling him a sellout. See, the man who walked out of prison after 27 years and chose forgiveness over revenge, he also chose a settlement. And his critics say that settlement preserved the very economic system that crushed his people for 300 years. So is that the wisdom of a master strategist? Or was it the single greatest betrayal in modern African history? That's the conflict we have to unravel. And to do that, we have to get inside the mind of Nelson Mandela. All right, let's dive right in. And we're not going to start with a fact. We're going to start with a global mystery, a weird glitch in our collective memory that actually surrounds Mandela himself. It's a phenomenon so widespread, they literally named it after him. It's a strange question, I know, but it's an absolutely vital one. Think about it. Millions of people, right now, share this crystal clear memory of an event that never happened. They'll tell you they remember the news reports, the funeral, maybe even his widow's speech on TV. The only problem? None of it is real. And this feeling? It has a name, the Mandela Effect. It's this fascinating psychological idea that our brains can just create and store false memories. And when those fake memories get shared around, especially online, it's like a giant global game of telephone. A story starts one way, it gets twisted, and pretty soon millions of people believe the exact same wrong thing. It's a powerful, kind of scary reminder that our collective memory isn't perfect. So why Mandela? Why did this happen to him specifically? Well, this was no accident. It was engineered. For 27 years, the apartheid state had a strategy of total invisibility. They didn't just lock the man in a cell. They tried to literally erase the idea of him. They created this void, a blank space in the world's consciousness. And what did our collective mind do? It filled that void with the story it expected to hear, a tragic ending for a Black liberation leader fighting the most powerful state in Africa. The musician Johnny Clegg just captured this perfectly. Asimbo Nanga. It means we have not seen him. You see, this wasn't just politics, it was psychological warfare. By turning a living, breathing man into a ghost, the state created the perfect breeding ground for the Mandela Effect. They turned him into a myth. And you know what? Myths are incredibly easy to misremember. And that right there brings us to the absolute core of this whole explainer. If our collective memory of his death is a complete fiction, it forces us to ask a much bigger, much more dangerous question. What else about the man, the icon, the so-called saint is also a fiction? What else did we get wrong? To even begin to understand Mandela, we can't start with him. We have to place him in this grand sweeping arc of Southern African history. And in this story, we have to be clear. Africa is the protagonist. Shaka Zulu builds the empire. King Leopold comes and steals the continent. Cecil Rhodes builds the very architecture of extraction. P.W. Botha locks the final doors of apartheid. And inside that prison, one man, Nelson Mandela, has almost 3 decades to think, to strategize, and to decide what freedom, what real justice actually costs. So to get inside the mind of the strategist who walked out of that prison, we have to go back. We have to understand the world that created the boy, long before the world decided to make him an icon. Okay, first thing, he wasn't born Nelson. His father named him Rolihlahla. In the Xhosa language, it literally means pulling the branch of a tree, but what it really means is troublemaker. The name Nelson, that was given to him on his first day of school by a teacher, probably to honor some British admiral. And that single act of renaming, it's the perfect symbol of the whole colonial project, right? The attempt to erase an African identity and just slap a European one on top. A troublemaker versus a lord. That conflict defined his entire life. The world he was born into was run by this incredibly profound African philosophy, Ubuntu. It's a concept that basically means I am because we are. It's the polar opposite of the rugged individualism you see in the West. Ubuntu says your humanity isn't just something you have on your own. Nope. It's forged, it's created through your connection to your community, to your people, to your ancestors. And this wasn't just some abstract idea. As the trauma expert Wessel van der Kolk pointed out, this became the practical, guiding principle for South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Think about that phrase. My humanity is inextricably bound up in yours. It's a psychological tool for healing collective trauma. It's built on the idea that none of us can be whole until we recognize our shared existence. This philosophy, this was the operating system of Mandela's mind. And then you have to add this on top, his royal formation. Mandela was born into the Madiba clan of the Thembu royal family. After his father died, he was raised in the regent's own household. Now, this is crucial. From his earliest days, he was psychologically conditioned to believe his life was not his own. It belonged to his people. His ambition wasn't for himself, it was for the collective. So this isn't the story of a man who just chose to be a leader. It's the story of a man who was raised to believe he had absolutely no other choice. Okay, so let's explore how this foundation, this troublemaker, with a royal sense of duty and a worldview of Ubuntu, started to evolve. Because that prison cell, it wasn't just punishment. For Mandela, it became a laboratory. It was a place where he could forge the strategic and psychological weapons he was going to need to take down a nuclear-armed state from a 6-foot cell. First, we've got to understand a key concept from something called game theory. It's called a dominant strategy. So imagine two rival companies, right? And they're both trying to decide if they should run a crazy expensive Super Bowl ad. If company A runs an ad and company B doesn't, A wins. If B runs an ad and A doesn't, B wins. If they both do it, they just cancel each other out and they both waste a ton of money. And if neither does it, they both save their cash. A dominant strategy is the move that gives you the best possible result no matter what the other guy decides to do. So, back in 1961, after 17 years of strictly following a philosophy of nonviolence, Mandela co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC. The world saw this as a turn to terrorism, but if you look at it with the cold logic of game theory, it was a dominant strategy. Why? Because the state had responded to peaceful protests with massacres and arrests. Every single nonviolent door had been slammed shut. The choice wasn't between violence and nonviolence anymore. The choice was between violent resistance and just giving up. So armed struggle became the only rational move that offered any chance of a better outcome, no matter what the state did next. Let's look at another tool in his kit, the commitment device. This is when you intentionally limit your own future options to make your promises, or your threats, more believable to your opponent. A simple example is a money-back guarantee. A company commits itself to losing money if its product is bad, which makes you, the customer, believe their promise that the product is good. The classic, hardcore example is the general who burns his own ships after landing on an enemy shore. He's signaling to everyone, his own army and the enemy, that retreat is literally not an option. Inside that prison, Mandela became an absolute master of the commitment device. Time and time again, he was offered a deal for his freedom. In 76, he could have been released to Bantustan. He said no. In 82, he could have been freed if he renounced his allies. He said no. In 1985, President P.W. Botha himself offered him freedom if he just renounced violence. He refused. Now, each refusal wasn't just a moral stand. It was a strategic move. He was burning his own boats, in public, for the whole world to see. He was building his credibility, signaling to his enemy, and just as importantly to his own people, that he could not be broken, and that his word was absolute. And that credibility would later become his most powerful weapon. Okay, now for the final piece of the strategic puzzle, the prisoner's dilemma. Here's the classic setup. Two partners in crime get arrested and are put in separate cells. They can't talk to each other. The prosecutor offers each of them the exact same deal. If you betray your partner and he stays silent, you walk free and he gets 10 years. If you both betray each other, you both get 5 years. But if you both stay silent, you both only get 1 year on a lesser charge. The dilemma is that if you're only thinking about yourself, your best move is always to betray your partner. But that leads to a much worse outcome for both of you than if you had just trusted each other and cooperated.
And this brings us right to the negotiations to end apartheid, CODISA. It was a massive, high-stakes prisoner's dilemma. The players, the ANC, and the ruling National Party. The absolute worst-case scenario for everyone was mutual defection, which would mean a full-blown civil war. The best case, mutual cooperation, a negotiated peace. But neither side trusted the other. So how did Mandela solve it? He solved it with the credibility he had spent decades building in that cell. All those commitment devices, all those times he refused to leave prison, proved his word was unbreakable. The National Party, now led by F.W. de Klerk, could finally believe that a promise from Mandela was a promise he would actually keep. He made cooperation the most rational choice for his enemy. He didn't just win the game, he completely changed how it was played. And this is where it all leads. The moment he walks out of that prison, the man kind of dies, and two opposing myths are born. You've got the perfect picture, and you've got the worst. And we have to look at both of these stories, the saint and the sellout, with the same sharp analytical rigor. Let's start with the saint. This is the story the world knows and loves, and it begins right here at the Rivonia trial in 1964. Mandela is facing the death penalty,
And he looks his accusers right in the eye and delivers one of the most powerful speeches of the entire 20th century. He wasn't begging for his life, he was stating his terms. And this number, this illustrates the foundation of that sainthood. 27 years, 9,855 days. That's a lifetime spent in a cell. He had every single reason to come out of there consumed by bitterness and rage, but he didn't. He came out preaching reconciliation. And that singular act of grace is really the core of the saint narrative. But now we have to turn to the other picture, the one you don't really see in the Hollywood movies, the sellout accusation. And this is a story of profound betrayal, especially for the born-free generation, the kids born after 1994. According to his critics, the deal he struck was a deal with the devil. They allege that in exchange for political power, Mandela's ANC agreed to protect the vast economic power of the white minority. They say he basically preserved the engine of apartheid, just with a new driver at the wheel. And look, this isn't just a feeling people have. It's backed up by cold, hard data. This chart shows the brutal economic reality that fuels the sellout critique. While sources show a society that is politically free, the economic gap between white and black South Africans is still one of the largest on planet Earth. For millions of people, their lived experience is that apartheid never truly ended. It just got privatized. And right here, this is the specific moment of betrayal, according to the critics. On the left, you have the promise. This is from the Freedom Charter of 1955, the foundational document of the entire struggle, and it explicitly calls for nationalizing the mines, the banks, all of it. On the right, you have the reality of the 1994 settlement, and it constitutionally protected private property, keeping those exact same assets in the exact same hands. For his detractors, this is the smoking gun. This is the moment they say the revolution was sold out. So how can both of these pictures, the saint and the sellout, be true at the same time? To make sense of this massive contradiction, we need to zoom out, way out. We need a universal framework, one that's thousands of years old. We need to apply the lens of the ancient Greek philosopher, Plato. Let's start with Plato's most famous idea, the allegory of the cave. So, imagine a group of prisoners who have been chained up in a cave their entire lives, forced to face a blank wall. All they've ever seen are shadows projected on that wall. For them, those shadows are reality. Now, imagine one prisoner is set free. He goes outside and sees the real world. The sun, the trees, it's blinding, it's painful at first, but eventually he gets it. This is true reality. But when he goes back into the cave to tell the others what he saw, they don't believe him. They think he's gone mad. They actually prefer the familiar comfort of their shadow world. Now let's apply this directly to Mandela's dilemma. Was he the prisoner who was freed after 27 years? Did he walk out into the blinding sun of global geopolitics and the cold, hard realities of economics? Did he see the painful truth of what was actually possible versus what wasn't? And when he returned to the cave to lead his people out, did he offer them not the simple, satisfying shadow play of total revolution, but a difficult, messy, compromised reality? A reality they rejected because just maybe they feared the painful light of compromise more than the familiar darkness of the struggle. It completely reframes the entire debate, doesn't it? Now, to complete this analysis, we have to turn the psychological lens around, not just on Mandela, but on his critics. Why do different people see such radically different versions of the exact same man? Well, it's because they have different psychological needs. Okay, first, you've got the saint believers. For many who lived through the actual struggle, their psychology needs a perfect icon. A figure of absolute moral purity helps make all that immense suffering and sacrifice feel meaningful. To accept a flawed, compromising strategist, well, that might cheapen their own struggle. Then you have these sellout believers. This is the psychology of the born-free generation. Their lived reality is a massive contradiction. They were promised this rainbow nation, but they live in one of the most unequal societies on Earth. Their whole worldview is shaped by that painful disconnect. And finally, you've got the international spectator. The rest of the world, we need simple, heroic stories. The Mandela saint narrative lets people feel good about a really complex problem being solved. It serves an external need for a clean, happy ending, no matter how messy the reality is on the ground. And so, we complete the circle. We come back to that great historical arc of Southern Africa. After Shaka's empire, after Leopold's theft, Rhodes's architecture of extraction, and Botha's locked doors, one man, a troublemaker named Raleigh Hala, who was shaped by Ubuntu and forged into a master strategist, had to stand at the crossroads of history and decide what is the price of peace. In our next explainer, we're going inside the mind of a leader who believed that in order to save his nation, he first had to break it. A mind who saw order as the enemy and chaos as the most powerful creative tool imaginable. But we end with Mandela. After seeing the world that made him, the tools he used, and the impossible choices he faced, we're left with that final nagging question. Was he a sellout who surrendered a revolution? Or was he something much more complicated? The only man in the room who truly understood what victory actually cost.